Thank you, Steve. As I said, my name is Ana Lugo, and I am the statewide 0 to 5 census trainer for the First 5 Association. And as Steve mentioned, we developed a training curriculum for our local partners on how to engage our families in a culturally responsive way. And that really means to honor the agency of families and really understand where they're coming from so that we're able to better support them in removing barriers so that they are able to get counted. Our goal is to count the 0 to 5 population. As many of you may or may not know, 0 to 5 had some of the highest undercounts in the 2010 census, and with California being the state with some of the highest undercounts. So we are really working to make sure that we are all throughout the state working together to count all of our families, right? That's our goal. And in the process to really honor them and honor their experiences. I'm clicking. There we go. So as I mentioned, I'm from the First 5 Association. Prior to establishing my own consulting firm to do work on social equity, I was in the nonprofit business for over 10 years, and I worked all from direct services, doing direct service all the way up to leadership. So I just want to give you that background as we go through this presentation so that you understand that in developing this curriculum, we really did have a plethora of experiences in ensuring that we really try to make a comprehensive training for in order to get our families to be counted. The First 5 Association is a nonprofit membership organization. We really work with the 58 first local county commissions, and our job is really to be the advocacy and policy arm of the First 5, and that is why we're taking such a strong lead in making sure that all of our families get counted in the 2020 census. So I wanna just give you guys a quick snapshot of the 3 different branches of our network. Many of you are familiar with your local First 5 commissions. They really are the ones that work on the ground level and are in communication and partnership with all of our local organizations. We also have First 5 California, which is really the network that partners with state agencies and leverages funds strategically. And then you have the First 5 Association, and we really want to provide a strategic vision and provide coordination with state policy and advocacy to make sure that we are really helping our children thrive and that we're advocating for the things that will help our local organizations and non-local First 5 be successful in doing that. As I mentioned, we're taking a strong lead in leading the 0 to 5 census efforts throughout the state, and we have a team. Right here you have our coordinators that work with regions. As you can see, there's that little box under each of their names that shows you what regions they're covering. We have also our project coordinator, Mercedes, who does a lot of the amazing work throughout the state and also works with Southern California. I'm the state-wide trainer, and then you don't see her in this slide, but we have our project director, Kendra. And when we started developing this training, we really wanted to focus on honoring our families who are considered hard to count and really understanding where they're coming from, where some of the barriers may be coming from, where some of the trauma may be coming from, and how can we really help our local organizations understand that so that they're able to engage with our families in a culturally responsive way. And there are many, as someone who's worked on the ground, there are many, many amazing people who work on the ground with these families who have already the building blocks, but we wanted to make sure to bring them to the forefront and connect them to the census. So this next section really is about understanding the stories of our historically underserved communities. And I also want to mention that this is really about providing a historical context for how we got here today, and also the connection between our history of our country and the census itself. And to do that, we really based our trainings and our presentations on the pillars of diversity, equity, and belonging. This is really about celebrating who we are and the unique values that each of us brings to the table. And that is the same for our families on the ground level. So I want to start by talking about the evolution of race on the census. This is it's starting in the 1790s when the first census took place. Who were the people that were counted, right? What is the connection of race to the census? And what are some of the categories and the evolution of how the field of race within the census has shifted throughout history? I will also make sure to send a bunch of other resources that talk a lot more about this. And in 2020, we still have, as many of you know, controversy around race and ethnicity and how people will describe who they are in terms of this field within the census. When we talk about race and the census, it's important to acknowledge that race was embedded within the U.S. Constitution in context to the census, and that's where really the 3/5 compromise comes. And for those of you who don't know what the 3/5 compromise, it really came from Southern landowners who wanted to get as much representation and political power, but didn't want to acknowledge slaves as full humans. And so that really starts to set the context for understanding some of the barriers and traumas that our communities have gone through and how that may be affecting them today and creating concerns and fears around filling out the census beyond just, confidentiality and security. There is a line in history around how race was used within the census. One of the things that we also talk about are the mass killings of Native Americans, how their communities were decimated through the secession mass killings, cultural genocide, and how that may play a role today in their hesitancy in terms of being counted in the census. Once again, we go back to slavery and how that has affected our communities throughout history. It is also important to recognize that after slavery was abolished, still resources were not brought to our communities. And so it is something that plays a role. And as we do more and more trainings, a lot more comes out from communities of color around the concerns they have today that really do stem back throughout our history. And we also have other groups, other minority groups, other instances throughout history. This is certainly not a comprehensive slide of all that's happened throughout history, and we'll still see it today. And we've seen the discussion, especially around the census and the citizenship question, and just the fear that our immigrant communities have today. So it is important to set the context of history so that we can better understand how to engage with our communities and our families when we're having conversations around sharing their information and getting counted. And to wrap this section up, it is important that we all understand our biases and what we bring to the table when we're talking to our families so that we're able to really honor where they're at. And there is a video that I will also be happy to add as a resource. So now that we've had this historical context set and that we're able to really see how some of the barriers may also relate to the history of our country, I want to talk to you all about getting our children counted, getting our families counted, and why this is so critical for our communities. And I want to start by just giving you a quick snapshot of what the census is. As you know, we count all 50 states and the 5 U.S. territories. And some of the basics are around the fact that it is administered every 10 years. All residents of the U.S. are legally mandated to respond to the census. We did some research and found out that there is a penalty and a fine, but there have been no actual penalties that we found that have happened, and also we know that many people have gone uncounted in the past census. So it is important to keep in mind, and yet it's also important to acknowledge that we haven't actually found any evidence that shows that this fines have been done for people who have not filled out the census. And why participate in the census? The top three are really federal funding that trickles down to our communities. Many of you may be from programs that are dependent on some of this federal funding. We will talk later on about some of the specific programs, but for example, Head Start, SNAP, Section 8, those are all programs that are dependent on federal funding and that use the census data to be able to allocate those funding, the funding. Congressional reapportionment and political redistricting also play a part in the impetus for participating in the census. And so we get to the imperative for counting our hard-to-count communities. And one of the things that I encourage all of our trusted messengers is to really get intentional with the language. Hard to count is a term that is widely used in relationship to communities that have been historically disenfranchised and underserved. So it's just important that we make sure that we're not putting that on our families when we're talking to them. You also see here the list of the different communities that have a history of being undercounted, with young children at the very top, who is our target population at the first 5 associations. And this is just to give us an understanding of really who these minority groups are, and that they also do make up the majority of the people in our state. And so it's really important that we talk to them about the collective power that we hold as a group, and that we encourage them and empower them to fill out the census. As the Latino community often says in their tagline is, to resist, we must exist, right? So it is important that we talk to our families about getting counted and making sure that the dollars are coming into our community. Here are some of the reasons why children are being missed. Over 80% of the children who were missed, were 0 to 5 that were missed in the 2010 census, really were children who came from households that did fill out a census form. So it is important that we talk to our families about the importance of counting our children. Sometimes there may be confusion if a baby was born and it's still in the hospital, that baby should still be counted within the household. Children are much more likely to be missed if the person filling out the census is not their biological parent or their adopted parent. And when children come from diverse household makeup, such as multi-generational homes, extended families staying at the home, or multi-family homes, that they can also get missed. Some other reasons for this is that sometimes families don't trust the government and they don't want to report their children. Naleo found that mixed status families also are nervous about reporting their children and sometimes being counted at all. And they also found that 15% of the people in their study said that they would not include their children or didn't know if they would. So now we get into the funding streams and how much we could lose as a state. As it says on this slide, in 2010, we failed to count over 1.5 million state residents here in California. And for every person we lost more than $2,000. That number changes, but we have said on average around $2,000. And the undercount this time around could cost California more than $1.5 billion across all federal programs. And there are reports that state that there are over 300 programs that use census data to be able to decide how they will be funding our local communities. So it is widely used, and it is used for programs that directly affect our families. And as we can see here, what's at stake for our kids here in California, special aid, Head Start, SNAP, Medicaid, Section 8, TANF. So all programs that will directly affect our children. The other thing to keep in mind is that school districts also use this data for planning purposes. So if our children are not accurately counted, then it is much harder for them to predict how many children will come into the school district, and that can place a stress on the schools, but also on our students when they're in schools that were not adequately, they didn't adequately plan for the population that they were getting. And really, being counted helps our children thrive. It makes us make a stronger case for advocacy at the state level. There's a more equitable distribution of funds. As I said, there's better planning, and there is more funding for key programs, and which really helps with the well-being of our children. So now we get into some of the diverse living experiences that are happening for our families, and some of the questions around, do we count them in our home? Do we not? So as you can see here, we have folks experiencing homelessness. The Census Bureau says that they have a special process for counting them if they're in transitory locations like campgrounds, hotels, shelters. Also, if the students are in college, the colleges will count them if they're in the dorms. Folks in nursing homes will be counted by the administration of the nursing homes. And if someone is temporarily deployed overseas in the military, the census is asking that they be counted at their usual home address. So if any of your families are experiencing any of these diverse living experiences, it is important to know who gets counted and who doesn't get counted. Our general rule is if a person's laying their head on the pillow, wherever a person's laying their head on the pillow on April 1st, that's where they should be counted. And so this is a lot of information and a lot of text, but the overall gist of this is that in March, they will start sending the postcards for people with the unique identifier so that people can start filling out the census online. And that's also when they will be counting people who are experiencing homelessness. So toward the end of March, early April. In early April, they will continue to send reminders, and census takers will be going to colleges. And then in May, that's when census takers are going to start coming into neighborhoods. The Census Bureau did put out an ask around, if your organization is canvassing neighborhoods, make sure that you stop your canvassing by mid-May, so there isn't confusion when the census takers start coming into the neighborhoods. So we're asking families to get counted as soon as possible, to fill out the census as soon as possible, but definitely by the end of April, making sure, especially if our families are afraid of having someone come knock on their door, making sure that they get counted before May, so that we can really mitigate the chance that someone will come to their door. And then we get to, how do we build a toolbox to be able to provide our families with information and also give them some resources. And so the very first thing is really making sure that we're having authentic conversations with our families, that we are getting curious about what it is that is going on in their lives and how we can best support them as organizations and trusted messengers in removing those barriers. So we can ask our families questions like, what has your experience been with the census? We have found that there is, for example, the adults in the families are immigrants from another country. There's a chance that they have had experience with filling out a census in their country of origin, and they may have a different experience. So if we ask them what their experience has been with the census, then we can gather an idea of how familiar they are with it. Asking them if concrete questions like, do they know how they'll be filling out the census? This may bring up for them, that they need access to a computer or that they're not comfortable with a computer, things like that. As having the census online is great for those of us who have a high level of exposure and comfort to a computer, but if some of our families have not, then they may not be as comfortable, and that may itself be a barrier for them. You should also have access to your local clock, so that's the places that will be providing access to computers throughout your counties. I'm sure that Steve may have access to a list of where they will be located in your county. Ask them if they're concerned about being able or having the time to fill out the census. This will really help them in starting to think through how they will do it and getting really practical about it. Also, you may ask them if there's anything you can do to support them. We are, as trusted messengers and organizations, we cannot fill out the census for them, but we can definitely support them and answer questions. So also to keep in mind, if you do make a computer available within your organization, make sure that that computer is not staffed at any time and that the computer is in a place where they can privately enter their information. And right back to the to computers, you can ask them if they need access to a computer or phone, and then let them know where this clock will be located. And lastly, you can ask them if you can give them some information about the census, right? Let's not assume that we can just give people information. Let's ask them if this is something that they're interested in. Some other resources that you have available to you at first5association.org are some one-pagers with some very important facts and some common questions about the census. Also, it has a breakdown of some of the important federal funding streams for our children. You also, as organizations, can have access to our social press kit if you want to put any of these resources on social media. We have a bunch of graphics that talk about the importance of getting counted. If you want to do radio, we have this press kit both in English and Spanish. And if you have a need for a different language, please do let us know. We have elevator speeches and many other resources on the website, and we will send you the URL. You can see it on this slide, but we'll also send it to you. The other thing that your counties will have access to that's amazing resource for having this types of conversations with our families is the We Count book. It's both in English and Spanish. Every county will get a certain amount of books, and then they're also able to order more. So make sure to get in touch with your local First Five and ask them if they have books for you if you're an organization that's interested in this book. The authors of this book really wanted to make sure that they had different family makeups, so it really takes you through different family makeups and answers many of these questions about diverse living experiences for families. And it's also a fun read. It talks about the Trusted Messenger program. A lot of our direct service providers, they can use this book as a tool for helping inform our families on the ground. And the learning objectives really is understanding the importance of families and communities, getting counted, and using this book as a tool so that our families have something to refer to when they're doing the census if they have any questions. And lastly, just making sure that we think about like what makes reading special and fun for us, and encouraging that in our families. We have a list of many other toolkits for different populations, and even more that are not listed on here. If you work with the Latino Community Foundation has created a Censoteria, which is modeled after the game called Loteria. And they are doing events throughout California where they invite families to come and play the game. And it's both a way of creating community and having information for our families. And now we're going to get into the mechanics of the census. And I want to start by telling you about the mapping tool that the California Census website has around our hard-to-count populations. If you want to see what the makeup of the census tracts in your community looks like, this is a good mapping tool. It takes you through many different points of information. Some of the most important ones are who are the hard-to-count populations per se in your community. As you can see here, it talks about children under 5 being one of the highest, one of the populations with the highest undercount. In this sample census tract that I'm showing you here, it also talks at the very bottom what their mail contact strategy is and the language that they will be sending this postcards in, so you can get an idea of how families will be reached out to. And then it has a lot of other information that you may find interesting. And the census has put out a sample of what the survey will look like. And there are 9 questions plus all the questions for every person in the household. So as you can see here, the first question is the number of people residing in the household, and then additional people staying there on April 1st that do not include the people on the first question, and then the type of home they live in and the phone number. One of the questions that has come up is, can people live fields blank and move on to the next set of questions? And my understanding is that you are not able to. So one of the questions that also came up was, what if someone doesn't have a phone number? And I think that if they do not have a phone number, it is important for them to provide an email. I think they have the ability to provide an email, but also they may be able to do the same digit consecutively. But we're working on getting the answer to that question for all of you. Number 5 is really providing information about each person living there. So number 6 goes into the sex of the person. I know that especially within the LGBTQIA community, there's a concern about this question. And so it is important to acknowledge that. And also, if they're not able to leave it blank, we hate that this could be a barrier for families. And so making sure that we expose our families to these questions prior to having them fill it out so that they're able to really think through the answers that they will give. Number 7, as you can see, is the age plus the birth date. Number 8, that's when we get into the question about race. So number 8 really asks about, is this person of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And then we get into the actual question on race and where people can self-identify as they wish. So these are the different categories, and they give some examples. They're not examples of every single group. They're just examples of some. And if a person doesn't find any of those to be applicable, at the end, they do have options for some other race or place of origin. And with that, this concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Anna. I don't see any questions in the chat box just yet, but if anyone has a question and they'd like to enter it there, please feel free or comment. I'll also unmute everybody now. We'll give this a shot, and hopefully we won't have background noise. If everybody could just please mute themselves, so when I unmute you, we don't hear, the background conversations and so on.
Yeah. And
okay.
Steve, can I just also real quick say that we do have trainings available throughout the state, or if you want to request the training yourself, we are happy to come and train you, and I can send a link to that request form. And in the next slide, you will also see all of our contact information and the different regional coordinators. So if you want to reach out to them directly, Mercedes is the one that has been working with Southern California. So you are more than welcome to email her. You're also welcome to email me or our Census Project Director, Kendra.
Terrific. Okay, yeah, that's great to know. Yeah, if anybody has the need to have or the desire to bring the training to the rest of the staff, that's good information to have. We'll post this. We'll post the slides. We'll post the recording of the webinar. We'll post all the related resources that Anna has referred to in the webinar here, all on the blog as we do with these webinars, and we'll send out the link to that afterwards. Are there any questions about this here? I'm going to unmute everybody now, so just make sure no side conversations, and mute yourself if you're not talking. Thank you. Here we go.
Do you want us to record it?
All right, so everybody's unmuted. If you have a question, you can do that by phone or use the chat box.
While we're waiting for questions, I can also say that the Census has put out a video taking you through the online survey. So if you're interested in seeing what that will look like, it is on their website at 2020census.gov.
Okay, great. We'll be sure to include that link as well. And I guess I have a comment here. It's just for all the OSs. If you're wondering, what your responsibility is with respect to any of this. I mean, we're not expecting you to be census canvassers here, but if my ask would be just that if you could take this back to the staff and encourage parent coaches, RNs, HLs, those who are working with families after you work with them, just to make sure that they're all aware of these resources and aware of the importance of making everybody count. There's a lot at stake for it, so I hope you'll kind of be the conduit from this training to the rest of the staff. Think of this as sort of a train the trainer, I guess.
Yes, and this is certainly a lot of information. And as Steve said, one of the easiest things to do is just to ask people if they've heard about the census and if you may give them some information. And we have tons of swag and bookmarks and pamphlets and one-pagers. And so if any of your organizations are in need of any of that, please do let us know.
We do still have some background noise. If you're not speaking, please remember to just hit that mute button on your phone. Thank you.
Yeah, speak whenever you want.
Any questions or comments from anybody? The line is open. You're free to speak. It was a very thorough presentation, so that may explain why there are no questions. Very helpful, lots of resources, lots of information. Has anybody ever experienced anybody ever talked about the census? Has it ever even come up in your work doing outreach? Yamalet says no. No for Fallon as well. Yeah, I mean, I know, as I said before, it's not, there's no expectation that you're going to be out doing census canvassing, but, it's important. And even the materials, I know that sometimes when you're working with a family, it's helpful to have materials, if they have other kids, especially, to share those with them. Anna, are there materials that you have that are like child friendly, almost like coloring books or storybook type things that would be good for maybe older siblings? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, so some of the resources in terms of like coloring, they're from the We Count book family. So you can certainly have access to the books. You can also have access on their website to coloring sheets. There's also a placemat that you can have access to. And much of this will be coming to your local First Five. So especially for organizations, I mean, I know that not every single local organization got funding to do work on the census. And if your organization did not get funding, we're truly appreciative of you taking the time to give information or resource to the families, as we know it's going to take all of us to get all of our families counted throughout the state, because there is so much at stake, not only in terms of funding, but just making sure that that we are well prepared for our children who are coming into the school system within the next 10 years, right? So making sure that if you just want to have some bookmarks or something simple that you can just give to the families. I know that there's just always so much work to do that it may not be feasible to have a 10-minute conversation with the family, but sometimes something as simple as the book or bookmark or one pager or the coloring sheet may help families spark conversations within their households around the census. So whatever your organization has the bandwidth and capacity to do, and in whichever way we can support you in getting those resources, we are happy to do so.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and we can get, Anna, we work closely at LA Best Babies Network. We work with First Five LA closely, and I'll see what we can get our hands on in terms of the printed materials, placemats, coloring books, and all those goodies.
Yes, and those are interactive things that I think are super helpful. So yes, Steve, if there's anything you need, please do let us know. And also, First Five LA is amazing, and they're doing so much amazing work. So they're also great partners.
Definitely. Okay, great. Any other comments about the census or other questions? All right. Well, yeah, I see we have the contact information there for Anna or anybody. You can reach out to me, and I can pass along questions or comments afterwards as well. So with that, I guess we can leave it there. Thank you very much, Anna, for the very helpful and thorough presentation.
Thank you for having me. I'm really appreciative of the time.
Great.
No, this is it for me,
you.
And I'm really grateful that you gave me the time to come and talk to you all.
All right. Well, thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.